Right at Last by Elizabeth Gaskell. Dr. Brown was poor and had to make his way in the world. He had gone to study his profession in Edinburgh, and his energy, ability and good conduct had entitled him to some notice on the part of the professors. Once introduced to the ladies of their families, his prepossessing appearance and pleasing manners made him a universal favourite. And perhaps no other student received so many invitations to dancing and evening parties, or was so often singled out to fill up an odd vacancy at the last moment at the dinner table. No one knew particularly who he was or where he sprang from, but then he had no near relations, as he had once or twice observed. So he was evidently not hampered with low-born or low-bred connections. He had been in mourning for his mother when he first came to college. All this much was recalled to the recollection of Professor Fraser by his niece Margaret, as she stood before him one morning in his study, telling him in a low but resolute voice that the night before Dr. James Brown had offered her marriage, that she had accepted him, and that he was intending to call on Professor Fraser, her uncle and natural guardian, that very morning to obtain his consent to their engagement. Professor Fraser was perfectly aware from Margaret's manner that his consent was regarded by her as a mere form, for that her mind was made up. And he had more than once had occasion to find out how inflexible she could be. Yet he too was of the same blood, and held to his own opinions in the same obdurate manner. The consequence of which frequently was that uncle and niece had argued themselves into mutual bitterness of feeling without altering each other's opinions one jot. But Professor Fraser could not restrain himself on this occasion of all others. "Then, Margaret, you will just quietly settle down to be a beggar, for that lad Brown has little or no money to think of marrying upon. You might be my Lady Kennedy if you would." "I could not, uncle." "Nonsense, child. Sir Alexander is a personable and agreeable man, middle-aged, if you will. Well, a wilful woman maun have her way. But if I had had a notion that this youngster was sneaking into my house to cajole you into fancying him, I would have seen him far enough before I had ever let your aunt invite him to dinner. Aye, you may mutter, but I say no gentleman would ever have come into my house to seduce my niece's affections without first informing me of his intentions and asking my leave."
"Dr. Brown is a gentleman, Uncle Fraser, whatever you may think of him."
So you think. But who cares for the opinion of a lovesick girl? He is a handsome, plausible young fellow of good address, and I don't mean to deny his ability. But there is something about him I never did like, and now it's accounted for. And Sir Alexander, well, your aunt will be disappointed in you, Margaret, but you are always a headstrong girl. Has this Jamie Brown ever told you what his parents were, or where he comes from? I don't ask about his forebear, for he does not look like a lad who has ever had ancestors. And you a Fraser of Lovat. Fie for shame, Margaret. Who is this Jamie Brown?"
"He is James Brown, Doctor of Medicine of the University of Edinburgh, a good, clever young man, whom I love with my whole heart," replied Margaret, reddening.
"Hoot! Is that the way for a maiden to speak? Where does he come from? Who are his kinsfolk? Unless he can give a pretty good account of his family and prospects, I shall just bid him begone, Margaret, and that I tell you fairly."
"Uncle," her eyes were filling with hot, indignant tears, "I am of age. You know he is good and clever. Else why have you had him so often to your house? I marry him, not his kinsfolk. He's an orphan. I doubt if he has any relations that he keeps up with. He has no brothers nor sisters. I don't care where he comes from."
"What was his father?" asked Professor Fraser coldly.
"I don't know. Why should I go prying into every particular of his family and asking who his father was and what was the maiden name of his mother and when his grandmother was married?"
"Yet I think I have heard Miss Margaret Fraser speak up pretty strongly in favour of a long line of unspotted ancestry."
"I had forgotten our own, I suppose, when I spoke so. Simon Lord Lovat is a creditable great-uncle to the Frasers. If all tales be true, he ought to have been hanged for a felon instead of beheaded like a loyal gentleman."
"Oh, you're determined to foul your own nest? I have done. Let James Brown come in. I will make him my bow and thank him for condescending to marry a Fraser."
"Uncle," said Margaret, now fairly crying, "don't let us part in anger. We love each other in our hearts. You have been good to me, and so has my aunt. But I have given my word to Dr. Brown, and I must keep it. I should love him if he was the son of a ploughman. We don't expect to be rich. But he has a few hundreds to start with, and I have my own 100 a year.
Well, well, child, don't cry. You've settled it all for yourself, it seems, so I wash my hands of it. I shake off all responsibility. You will tell your aunt what arrangements you make with Dr. Brown about your marriage, and I will do what you wish in the matter. But don't send the young man in to me to ask my consent. I neither give it nor withhold it. It would have been different if it had been Sir Alexander.
Oh, Uncle Fraser, don't speak so. See Dr. Brown at any rate, for my sake. Tell him you consent. Let me belong to you that much. It seems so desolate at such a time to have to dispose of myself, as if nobody owned or cared for me.
The door was thrown open, and Dr. James Brown was announced.